I just think we ought to wait till after you graduate.
I don't.
It's only a month.
Janet, a month.
Please.
It's all right. I personally consider us engaged as of now. Congratulations.
David, no.
Look, you can say yes in a taxi. I have a 2:30 appointment
I'm
and you're...
staying right here.
Oh, afraid you'll say yes?
I'll see you tonight at Brandon's party.
Okay. You can say yes there just as well as in a taxi. Goodbye, darling.
Bye.
That's the last time she ever saw him alive. And that's the last time you'll ever see him alive.
Welcome to another episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my co-host
Sebastian Smoliński. Hello.
Welcome to episode number 34 of our podcast, in which we discuss every single film in Hitchcock's filmography, and we are making our way through this glorious filmography. And this episode we will discuss Rope, a film that Alfred Hitchcock made in 1948, the first film he made after his partnership with David O. Selznick. Last time we discussed the final unfortunate entry in that Hitchcock-Selznick cycle, which was The Paradine Case. And now we are about to discuss a film that was special in many ways in Hitchcock's filmography. This is his first color film. This is his first and only film made only with long takes, and we'll definitely discuss this technical aspect of it. And it's also a film in which the homosexual theme, which is often buried in Hitchcock films, is pretty much on the surface, as much on the surface as the 1948 mores and censorship would allow. But these are only several things that are exceptional about this film, especially if you remember that it was made in 1948. This is a film, I would say, that holds a special fascination for many people, even among, I think, Hitchcock scholars. It's a film that has many secrets that simply you cannot dismiss, even though I think it's not a perfect film for many reasons. However, this strange mixture of this sort of repressed homosexual theme, this striking technique, which was almost avant-garde at the time. I mean, it's really difficult to imagine a film like this even today, much less in 1948. And also strange casting choices that we will definitely discuss. And the connection to real-life murders committed by Leopold and Loeb in mid-1920s in Chicago, in and around Chicago, make this into a very, very strange cocktail, I would say. And I'm looking forward to discussing this film because it's impossible to dismiss it. It's a thriller, it's a murder mystery. The plot is quite simple. It's taken from a play, a 1929 play by Patrick Hamilton. And what we see is a story that takes place on a single afternoon into a night in New York City, in this very fancy pad, an apartment with a gorgeous killer view of Manhattan. And we see two men, Brandon and Philip. Brandon played by John Dahl and Philip played by Farley Granger, who in the very first seconds after the opening credits commit a murder. They strangle a man to death. They strangle their friend, actually, David Kentley, to death. They put his body in a trunk and they begin a party in which the guests of honor are the parents of the killed boy and his his current fiancée. And basically they give this very perverse dinner party to test their mettle and to test their philosophical thesis, which is a mixture of Dostoevsky and Nietzsche about the Übermensch, the superior beings, the men who are allowed to step outside of the boundaries of traditional morality. This killing, in a word, is an aesthetic act of proving their own superiority to other human beings. And this teaching was given to them by the character played by James Stewart, Rupert, who is their philosophy teacher, I guess. The film takes place in real time, so the 80 minutes of the film is the 80 minutes of the action, although some people say it's a little bit more complicated than that. But the main thing, and this is the last thing I'm saying in this introduction, is that it is made in a series of unbroken long takes, some of which are edited in a way which suggest even more continuity than there really is. So we have basically 10 shots in the entire film. Where do we start? When did you see this film first? Like, what was your first experience of this strange artifact named rope?
So yeah, I saw it as a teenager, and I think I took it in a pretty straightforward way. Maybe I sensed some homosexual subtext. Maybe, I'm not sure. Certainly, when I watched it for the second time with my wife a few years ago, I discovered more, and now when I watched it only third time, I mean, Professor Neil Badminton, who wrote the whole book about rope, he was watching this movie.
Perpetual Movement, that's the book that
we sent greetings to him. He watched Rope every day for a year. It's also possible, but no, I must say it's pure pleasure, and I think where we should start is the fact that this is the film that really is perfect for our contemporary media environment, when you can freeze frame, separate every frame. You can study, restudy, rewatch the film like ad infinity, we could say, right? So it's a really movie that is fun to scrutinize. This is something that really wasn't accessible for previous Hitchcock scholars. And for example, when you read very interesting essay by Peter Wallen, Rope Free Hypothesis, he repeats this common knowledge that the movie is made only of long takes which are hidden, and the cuts are hidden, right? And we know that only part of the cuts, as you mentioned, are hidden. Only some of them are, some takes end on the back of a character, and then the new take starts kind of like seamlessly or pseudo seamlessly weaving the visual storytelling, but actually there are just ordinary cuts, but the movie is so immersive in this very funny way. Of course, you may say, although it's rarely said about Rope, but it is of course theatrical movie based on a play and set in a single apartment, but because of this technical extravaganza and showmanship that Hitchcock showed, it's rarely discussed as a this so-called theatrical movie. But it's so immersive thanks to these theatrical qualities, vivid characters, very clear plot, very funny pieces of dialogue. It's a very funny movie. This is something I, for example, discover now when I rewatch it. It's really funny, and the main two protagonists, they are many things, but they are also a bit like Pinky and the Brain from the cartoon characters. There's this very funny vibe between them, just discussing the murder and so on. So I think it's also one of the best comedies Hitchcock made, I think.
Oh, that's interesting. I should probably say I saw this film quite early. There was this briefly in Poland that there was this cable TV called RTL 7 and they showed it late at night, and well, first of all, I saw it many times because I was very interested in this technical aspect of it. I was always very interested in long takes, and it was short, so relatively short, so you could sort of sneak in a quick VHS repeat after you came back from school and before you had your dinner. So I watched it many times, so I know it pretty well, although I did rewatch it for this occasion. Probably because of my sexual identity I picked up quite early, that that there's something going on here between those men. But actually, when I watch it now, I think that it's so funny. I mean, the whole notion, when you read about they were making the film, and the screenwriter Arthur Lawrence, who worked on the adaptation of the play after Hume Cronin, whom we saw as an actor in Shadow of a Doubt, prepared the treatment. They never discussed homosexuality like outright. They always referred to it as it. So, but it's so funny to watch it today because the film is very confused about the treatment of those characters, let's say, right? But it's funny that you mentioned that it's a comedy, because on some level I think it is. It's I would say Oscar Wildean comedy, because it's an amoral film, right?
With dandies.
With dandies, exactly. There are two dandies. They are immaculately dressed, those characters of Brandon and Philip. And in this long tradition, that probably the best book to read about this is Camille Paglia and Sexual Persona. In this long tradition of those like perfectly coiffed and perfectly dressed dandy characters who are really outside of traditional morality, right? I think those characters come straight out of this tradition, even though, of course, it was based on an actual case. However, according to this making of video, they never discussed the real case when they were making the film. It wouldn't be until much later, with the Tom Kaelin film called Swoon, that they really would delve into this. And that was, by the way, a very, very disturbing and very good film. But this, I mean, it's so funny because they cannot express the theme outrightly. But on the other hand, you have all those signifiers of them being dandies, of them being very close to one another in the frame. They are constantly, Brandon and Philip, they are placed much closer towards each other than two straight characters at the time would be placed. So that's one signifier that they are close, and we'll probably discuss even more. But this comedy aspect of it, I mean, it's so disturbing, because when I was watching this film now, I mean, this is a really shocking and gruesome premise, that you are still, after all those years, maybe I was even more shocked by this film now than I was back in the day, because you start off with this murder, you see the face of a strangled man in 1948, and then you present this dinner of his casket, basically, because Brandon has this brilliant idea of putting the food actually on top of the casket, and you have the parents. Actually, only the father comes to the party. You have the father of the young man, and then you have this whole discussion of exterminating people 3 years after Second World War ended. Actually, the name Hitler is mentioned, so I would say that this sort of air of mass extermination is still fresh in the culture. And here is Hitchcock making this totally immoral, twisted, ghoulish tale. And of course, there are precedents to that. You could watch Frank Capra's Arsenic and Old Lace, and you will have two charming ladies, who basically are also, burying.
But they are helping people.
Yeah, but they are helping you. But you should somebody should make like a video essay and compare, their justifications for helping people, and the justification that Rupert gives for his philosophy, of getting rid of people that you don't need. I mean, this was 1944, 48. So this is, I think, incredible that Hitchcock was able to pull this off. And I think that he was deeply fascinated by those characters of those dandies of Rupert, of Philip and Brandon, and.
But Rupert was also supposed to be a kind of like this dandy figure.
Yes,
in
he
some
was,
versions of the script, and different casting. Cary Grant in that role,
yes,
would bring another vibe like this.
Cary Grant was
vibe.
Discussed, and Montgomery Clift was discussed for the role of Rupert, the teacher. So. I mean, in the play, originally, he was also homosexual, and there was this suggestion that he had an affair at least with one of those guys. So that
probably Brandon.
Probably maybe. But the thing is that that would also play into this theme that he somehow seduced them or contaminated them with this sick philosophy. and yet there's one force in the film, I think, that works absolutely against this whole contemplation of the dandy, which is casting of James Stewart. Because if you imagine somebody, let's imagine the same movie with James Mason in the role of James Stewart, right, who shows up being a dandy himself and signifying some sort of sexual ambiguity and predatory nature, and this whole speech about, inferior humans, superior humans, this whole Nietzsche,
It's comedy again.
it would be high black comedy. But because Stewart is so, I would say, flamboyantly miscast, I mean, it's an obvious miscasting that he simply is not either homosexual or a philosophy professor,
Or capable of devising these theories.
Of treating anyone with anything less than total courtesy.
He will play in Harvey 2 years later.
Harvey 2 years
a
later,
huge rabbit.
and 2 years before he was Bailey
Suicidal.
in It's a Wonderful World, when he It's a Wonderful Frank Capra's film, where he was the nicest guy in the world, and actually maybe he was too nice for his own good. But so I think this crucial piece of inspired miscasting, I would say that it for me it destroys the film as an original conception of adapting the play, because James Stewart is cast in this role, this is no longer Rope as it was on the stage. It's something else. And now the question is, what is it then, right? What is it if you have this sort of the moral center of American post-war cinema, James Stewart, cast in this character of Rupert? What does it do to the story? Because, I mean, look at those guys, like, Farley Granger, John Dahl. Farley Granger, I think, openly bisexual. John Dahl, there was a rumor that he was homosexual. And just look at them and look at Rupert. I mean, they are not... How did those lessons even look like, that Rupert gave them back in the day? So I think it's an interesting case, and this is something that destroys this high black comedy feeling that otherwise with James Mason or Charles Lawton or any of those campy British actors, it would have been there. So. It's. I think the film has many contradictory impulses.
That's a wonderful point. And just imagine, when we speak about video essays, imagine Cary Grant juxtaposed. Cary Grant from Arsenic and Old Lace with his eyes popping out of his sockets, right?
Yes.
Recut with Brandon and Philip, towards the end. So you're totally right. But there's one thing that I sense makes James Stewart's role a bit more credible than it would have been in the moment of Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, right? It's the war experience, and it's a bit funny that Notorious we consider a masterpiece, and it was a very topical movie. The Paradine Case was a failure because it didn't have any connection with what was happening in post-war world. And now again, as we mentioned, there is this. It's in a way you could stretch and say that it's kind of a like post-Holocaust art in a way, right? Made with this sensibility and this acknowledgement of this mass destruction and of these human
and we
impulses.
know that Hitchcock was instrumental in cutting some of the footage from death camps. So if you look at Rope as a post-Holocaust film, then I think you're onto something.
Definitely, definitely. So there is this element which I think is still powerful, but I think that you mentioned the first cut, which I think that's the moment I really paid attention to it this time. The first cut, so the opening credits, the view of the street, the camera comes to the curtains, and this amazing cut. Exactly when I was thinking about all the other movies I saw from 1948 or before, that you cut from the curtains to the close-up of a man who is strangled by now. It's an amazing cut. I think for that one cut makes it a really gruesome, ghoulish tale, as you mentioned, and very powerful. I just imagine sitting in a theater and let's say, going this 2 minutes through the opening credits, and then bach, you have this close-up, which was apparently Hitchcock insisted on that close-up. For me, that makes it very powerful. And of course, I treat this movie as a comedy, but it is very disturbing in many ways. But when we discuss Stewart and what he brings to this movie, of course, I think he's pretty good in that role. But I think the finale suffers. I mean, this moment, because as many commentators point out, he's somehow implicated in this murder on the level of, you know, incepting the idea, right, to these two young boys. It's almost like, you know, like kind of like Elephant by Gus Van Sant, right? I mean, a bit like you have this feeling like, oh, let's do something immoral. And by the way, this very concept, I think it's worthy of Lars von Trier, like this concept of, you know, strangling the guy and making a feast on his carcass. Or
that's the house that Jack built.
Exactly.
Is a late iteration of this amoral play.
Yeah.
But, you know, the problem is, and it's a fascinating problem because it touches upon really many 20th century tropes, is that as it's played by James Stewart, the whole point of Rupert inspiring to do this, it really doesn't work, because the question is, when Stewart gives, you know, there's a long conversation with the father, wonderfully played by Sir Cedric Hardwicke, and, you know, Rupert gives him, lays out his philosophy of, you know, like, murder should be allowed. You don't believe him for a second, because it really, I mean, he plays it as a party joke. And when the father says, you are not serious, right? This is a joke, you are pulling my leg. Stewart says, oh, no, I'm very serious, but you don't feel the seriousness. And again, and this is the last time I will make this point, had it been James Mason, you would feel that he really means it, and then it would have been only logical that the boys took that lesson seriously, and they actually took it to its logical conclusion. But here, I mean, on some level, it may be a cosmic comedy, because it looks like those two guys simply mistook a joke for a philosophy.
Yes.
And that's why there's no flow of this dark and twisted philosophy from Rupert to the guys, because I think it's impossible to assume that James Stewart is serious when he says all of this stuff. It really sounds like one more joke. He enters the room and he's jokingly, you know, undermining the conventions of polite society. He says, "Oh, nice to see you. Why?" Right? And he makes those jokes that are those little barbs at, you know, the conventions of polite society.
He's a trickster.
He's a trickster, but they are very light. You know, they're just tickling the society. And when he explains his philosophy, it's exactly that. It feels like it's just one more joke that he's very, very eager to retract when the father is actually offended.
You're right. Just two arguments that could somehow defend Stewart. One thing, as I mentioned, this the post-war quality of James Stewart, who apparently, when you dig into production history, he wanted these darker roles because he saw a lot during the war. So apparently we have a different star than the 1930s or even the Philadelphia Story, James Stewart, right? That's one thing. Maybe it somehow appealed to him. But the other thing is, I think Rope is to a large extent a film about youth, you know, about young energy, which is dark energy here. This is we usually associate even young people in Hitchcock's films with some kind of innocent, young and innocent, right? No, young and very diabolical here. Right. So in this way, we have some kind of texture of the past here, right? He was their teacher a few years ago. Maybe there was something. Now he's older. Now he has a limp. He actually, when we look at it from the eugenics perspective, he is to be exterminated because he's not perfect. He doesn't have a perfect body as they do, right? That's
he doesn't look as superhuman as they, because they are both lean, young, and strong.
But maybe he used to. So maybe I'm not saying that it's a very convincing argument, to be honest. But maybe he used to be this dashing dandy. But now he's older. He said, "Oh, maybe I will marry this. I will marry this maid." You know, like that's one of the most stupid lines in the movie. I mean, why would James Stewart want or decide to marry this maid?
Well, I would marry her. I mean, she's fantastic. You know?
No, she's great, but
she's
you know.
she's the Thelma Ritter of this piece.
Exactly,
you know?
exactly.
Edith Evanson, and it's interesting because in the book you mentioned, Perpetual Movement. You can, by Professor Neil Badminton, you can find this tidbit that this role of this maid, the actress was actually working with a woman who was kind of a housekeeper for Hitchcock.
Yeah.
So she trained
to rehearse.
her.
Yeah.
Yes, she trained her how to, sort of how to be helpful at the party, and apparently it was so convincing that other actors on the set treated her as a maid, basically. that she really was like treated as a maid, even though she was an actress playing a very effective role. But as I said, I would marry her because she's the reality principle in the film, just like Thelma Ritter is this voice of folk reason in Rear Window, and apparently she's a very good cook as well. However, how can you imagine a marriage of this dark philosopher with this maid? That's another question. But for me, there are some elements here that, two elements fascinate me now, especially after all our discussions.
Exactly.
Because we really went deeper into Hitchcock, as it were. First of all, it struck me after all those years. First of all, Hitchcock's love of theater, because he spent so many hours in London when he was a young man, simply watching plays, right? And this is something John Russell Taylor, in his book on Hitchcock, really stresses, that he was an avid watcher of plays, that he loved theater, and until the end of his life, that he loved this form of a sort of enclosed play. And this is exactly this.
Well-made play.
Well-made play. So Hitchcock simply recreates this sensation of being in a theater, of course, with purely filmic means, because the film doesn't feel like theater really, because we get all the close-ups. And however, I think his love of theater is foundational for this piece. And the second thing is the love of giving parties, because as we read so much about Hitchcock, he was a great entertainer. Everybody says
bon vivant,
but also a domesticated one, because he had the home in Bel Air, and he loved to entertain people whom he worked with. He was wonderful, in giving food, drink, and he loved parties. So if you remember that, I think it's also telling that this whole party here, I think, and giving a party with a theme, I think this is something that we stumbled upon repeatedly in our readings of Hitchcock. And I think here he probably identifies with those two guys because they want to give this perfect party. Even though it's a twisted one, it's supposed to be perfect, even with an altar. So I think Hitchcock is very close here to things that he personally found very exciting. Theater, giving parties, giving form to chaos, elegance, wit, beauty. The guys are, the whole place is filled with paintings, with modern drawings. And I think, this is something very, and of course, full control, because it was a fully controlled environment. So I find this fascinating, that probably Hitchcock, in his temperament, was closest to those two guys. And I'm not even going into like sexual speculation. I'm just saying that throwing a party with a sophisticated theme, perfect drink, and good food was something that he himself very much enjoyed. I think that he enjoys the party in Rome.
Yeah, exactly. And let's mention that it's his first independent production. So like it's Hitchcock finally doing what he would like to do, and what he does, he gives a party. And also I think there is this great promotional photo with Hitchcock in the chest, this and the three guys around him, right? But I think it's precisely that. Of course, when Brandon says, "I'm a perfectionist, I always plan my parties." So this is this part of Hitchcock, the master of the ceremony and the controlling ego, let's say. But there's also this part of anxiety which Philip embodies, right? He's anxious about everything. So it's like Hitchcock split into these two characters. And
Yeah, perfect.
right.
I like this. And by the way, the video essay that we are proposing just expanded in my mind, because I thought there's one other film that should be cut into this essay about post-Holocaust confusion, Monsieur Verdoux, in which Chaplin gives an impassioned speech about who should live and who not. I'm not a really a criminal because I was only killing those widows or something like that. So, and this is 1947. So you have exactly that moment, and the speech that Chaplin gives in that film could be intercut with the speech that James Stewart gives. But I fully agree, and I think that for Hitchcock, something that we probably, as Eastern Europeans, we probably miss a lot of it. But the translation from the British context into American context is something that Arthur Lawrence, supposedly he was a lover of Fairleigh Granger.
Exactly.
So there's another layer. But he mentions that it was the biggest challenge was to change the language from a language that was used on the London stage to a convincingly American idiom. For example, many instances of "my dear boy" were crossed out because they were too overtly homosexual in American context. But one thing that really fascinates me is that if you forget everything about this movie that you knew before, if you just try to look at it for the first time, yesterday when I was rewatching it, I felt exactly this, like, wow. My first thought was, this is a document of a totally bygone era. I mean, who gives this kind of parties anymore? I mean, do you remember the original theme of the party that was supposed to be? It was about looking at those first editions. They have a pile of first editions, old books, basically. And the party was supposed to be this, that the father of David and others will come here.
And farewell party, because they were leaving
that's
Connecticut,
later.
I think.
That's later, but he says that originally it was to look at the first editions, right? So what kind of a world are we in? I mean, this is very precise. This is the world of white Protestant elite in, let's say, 19th and early 20th century. That those names, Brandon, David Kentley, I mean, it's all very, very, very precisely recreating this salon, as it were, this sort of elite gathering. I love the character of Joan Chandler, who plays the woman here, and she comes in, and you can feel her, this very specific mix of refinement, this sort of New York Algonquin wit. She's like, Dorothy Parker. She's, she burst into, and she's like 5 quips, in a row, and they're all funny, and she's fantastic. And I love that she writes this little column for a small magazine called Allure, which by the way reappears in Vertigo, because you can see Allure magazine, which never existed, on the desk at Barbara Belgede's place. But this is exactly this rarefied, beautiful world. These people are perfectly coiffed and perfectly dressed. I love this English lady, Constance Collier, who worked with Hitchcock. She, I think, wrote the play Downhill, right? But this is gone. I mean, there's nothing left of this world. I mean, there are no parties like this anymore. And I'm not saying this in a nostalgic mode. I'm saying that this particular setting of a New York loft, and those guys who apparently both went to Harvard, I think, right? And they are those dandies, aesthetes. They are on the cutting edge of, let's say, modern art. They are expanding the canon at this time. This is the time where Pollock was making his paintings and stuff. I think this is a document of its era. And imagine how they were discussing this piece when they were shooting it. Like at the same time, those modern. Probably what I'm trying to say is that this is a deeply modernist film. It's of that moment, but it shows a group and a social strata that will undergo severe turmoil in next decades. The 50s, the 60s will destroy it. The 60s will destroy it forever. But this is an interesting moment when we can enter a party like this and look at the first editions,
Exactly, but there is, in contemporary cinema, for example, I think Ruben Östlund, in his overappreciated movies. He's trying to somehow, but of course with this moral angle that Hitchcock is too smart to just make fun of these characters.
No, you're
right?
wrong. I'm sorry, you're wrong. Ruben Östlund is fascinated by the world of money. This is not a world of money. They are not necessarily all wealthy, but they are all in the world of university-minded elite of the time. This is the difference. I'm not saying that these are rich people, because probably there's some difference between them. But I'm saying that they all pay respect to a certain form of being, of culture, and I don't know. For me, the female character is especially, that she's writing for this little progressive magazine. It's
pretty amazing. But let us remember that the Jewish part of the identity of the original murderers of this case was erased. But that it actually raised suspicion of some moguls in Hollywood.
They were
Warner
afraid,
received telegrams,
They were afraid of resurrecting anti-Semitic stereotypes, especially since the victim was actually a child in the original case. So I'm not surprised that they were afraid. But here, I think this is a very waspish work.
Yes.
Like Hardwick and the old lady.
Exactly. She's like from Rebecca.
Did you ever meet Maria Kornatowska, the famous Polish
Just
film
once,
critic?
yes.
She was exactly
I saw her.
Exactly like that.
Yes. Interestingly, and this is something I didn't know, to be honest. I don't know if Patrick McGilligan describes it, and if it's true at all. But Peter Walden writes that Hitchcock was a bully, that he was not bullied in school, that he was a bully. I don't know. Maybe it's not accurate, and maybe McGilligan gets it better because McGilligan describes Hitchcock as a shy child, right, and so on. But Peter Wallen describes, in the context of Rope, he writes about English school system, how it kind of makes this. Once again, if we were talking about the culture of the era, right, this aspect of bullying, apparently Wallen even goes as far as to interpret the disappointment of Patrick Hamilton with the adaptation as a kind of another prank, another practical joke by Hitchcock, who was a bully and bullied Patrick Hamilton in a very indirect way. But this is interesting. I didn't look at it from that perspective, but certainly I think this vibe is there. But I was thinking recently about the form and this Hitchcock obsession with long takes, and I think we still often take Hitchcock out of context, right, of what was happening in world cinema in general. And I think in this case, I have this idea, maybe it was spelled out somewhere, that he's very much up to date with what's happening in world cinema. I'm reading David Bordwell's On the History of Film Style right now, and there is this great chapter about Bazinian theory of film style, evolution of language, and of course we know that Greg Toland, Orson Welles, William Wyler, Italian neorealism. There was actually in the 40s. Of course, in America, of course, we have film noir, shadows, and so on. But actually, in the 40s, 2 years earlier, William Wyler wins, right, for the best years. So we have this obsession.
The best years of our lives.
Yeah, maybe not so much with long takes, but certainly deep focus, but also long takes, right? So there is this interesting cultural moment when filmmakers somehow and film critics see that as some kind of the next stage of the evolution and something that makes movies more complicated. Of course, in Europe we don't have these tableaus that maybe we can find in Wyler's films, but certainly I think Rope may be seen as exhibiting part of this tradition. Let's experiment with this fluid movement with a screen that the viewer can choose where one looks.
Of course, and I would say even if it goes further, because the most Ropian shot in Notorious is the key shot, of course, because here the thing is, we know very well that this film consists of 10 takes, and but when you're watching it, we are aware of it. I think we are, because we are Hitchcock buffs, but there's so much editing going on in the frame. The camera changes positions. We go from like a wider shot to a close-up. Editing is there. It's just that there's no cutting.
Yeah.
So and this is something that also when the film first opened, many reviewers said, this camera is like a character in the story. It's prowling, it's looking, it's peeking. For me, the most modern and shocking parts are where the camera is totally stationary, and most of the action takes place out of the frame. For example, when the main conversation is outside of the frame, and we see in a very, 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 very long stretch as the maid is, cleaning up the chest before she almost opens it, right? But you don't see the character speaking. You just see her making her rounds, as she goes back to the kitchen, goes back to the trunk, goes back to the kitchen again. And in this moments, it's almost like an early iteration of Michael Haneke, like those long enigmatic shots, in which you simply are there, but you know that there's something sinister going on, but you are looking the other way. And this is, again, very modern. And if you think of this, I think the Exhibit A in the case for Hitchcock as a great modernist of 20th century is this film, because A, it's obsessed with form, it's obsessed with the marriage of form and content, it's obsessed with pushing the boundary of the form, just like James Joyce was obsessed with it when he wrote Ulysses, an 800 novel that was recounting single day, right? So here is Hitchcock, who is obsessed with the form, and at the same time you have new abstractionist painting, you have Pollock. Imagine, if you leave this apartment, the film was shot in California, of course, but if you leave this apartment, you enter the New York of the beatniks, of those experiments of Actors Studio and Monty Clift, struggling with his identity and stuff. This is the time and place that this film sort of sucks up. This is also, by the way, exactly the time and place, and perhaps even a location of Rear Window, because Rear Window takes place in Greenwich Village, and you have this, abstractionist sculptor, doing her thing. Maybe even, the boys and Jeff were neighbors, neighbors. Somewhere in Greenwich Village. So I think that Hitchcock was very much connected to this modernist moment, and the film must have been quite shocking on every possible level. Like what happens in the film, the first shot you mentioned, a dead man being strangled in our in front of our eyes, and yet I don't know, there's something wrong with the film as well. I mean, does it really work? Like, are you really invested in this suspense? The word suspense actually is mentioned, right?
Yes.
It will give it another dash of suspense,
and
right?
The charm of Brandon is mentioned. I think I was trying to
charm
5 times at least. The word charm, right?
I love when Philip says, "I suppose that's part of your charm." In a way.
That's great. But so on the one hand, it's a modernist experimental film, we can say. But at the same time, it was always in Hitchcock. It is old-fashioned in some ways, right? In the way the characters are introduced, right, one after another. Now I'm thinking about Zbigniew Rybczyński's Tango, right?
Yes.
One place,
or Sierra Nevada.
Exactly. So on the one hand, we have this, and also the question that the movie works. I think it's a crucial one because it's a pure pleasure, but maybe it's some kind of closer to like this guilty pleasure or like this. I don't know, because every line is juicy almost. And it's also connected with the anecdote, very funny one, by the way, that Hitchcock's associate, Sidney Bernstein, told the screenwriter, I think it was Arthur Lawrence, right? Or maybe some other collaborator. No, I think it was Lawrence who's credited that, every line must be a masterpiece. And of course, Hitchcock then decided he won't, allow him that close to screenwriters, because it's intimidating. Hitchcock was working on that film in a very different way, more relaxed, more easygoing, and so on. But it's like every line is juicy, every line is supposedly meaningful. There was this, I think, not a very good one, The Party by Sally Potter a few years ago, right?
Oh my god!
It was a terrible film, like based on the same premise, but in that film, I mean, similar premise, no murder, I think, involved, but the film in which, in the course of the action, some hidden traumas or problems or infidelities arise, right? But I think here it works. But for me, really, as I mentioned, the James Stewart towards the end doesn't work. I mean, the situation when he says, "Oh, how could you understand me this way?" I think it doesn't work. It's a bit stupid. Of course, we know it's like in gangster pictures of the 1930s. There must be, they want crime without punishment, and we of course know that punishment must come in 48, right? But on the other hand, like the fervor, the moral fervor that James Stewart enters towards the end. It kind of spoils all the fun that we had before.
Well, but I think it's more complex. First of all, our video essay just got expanded again because Kind Hearts and Coronets was made 1 year later and is even more immoral, in which a character kills off half of his family, and we are actually on his side for the most of the film. So there's something to be said about this sort of post-Holocaust amoral films, you know, that are dealing like Monsieur Verdoux and this one and Kind Hearts. But you know, the guy in Kind Hearts kills more people than Brandon in Phillips.
Let's remember Peter Lorre's The Lost One.
The Lost One, that's true.
But he
and the remake of M was at the same time 51.
Exactly.
So, but you know, the thing is, there's such a thing as the sort of well-made play in this sort of West End Broadway tradition that simply at that time was the chief expression of the, let's say, refined literary culture of the English-speaking world, right? You have those plays that were made into movies, Philip Barry, Philadelphia Story. You know, it was simply a form of art that was at its absolute peak, and it had its roots in, I don't know, Shakespeare, Restoration Comedy, Oscar Wilde, whatever. But that was exactly where the best minds were to be found. And this is why, you know, Herman Mankiewicz went to Hollywood, you know, because this was exactly where the brightest people and the most gifted writers were. New York stage. And this, when, you know, Arthur Lawrence, when he polished this script and when he Americanized it, of course, he gave it this polish, you know, of this like perfectly arranged, you know, punchlines and the dialogue, and it's all sparkling, and it's basically you could have been watching this on Broadway at that time, right? Of course, again, this is a very cinematic film, so I'm not saying it's stagey. Dial M for Murder, that's stagey, but this isn't stagey. But you know, I think the fascinating thing is that the form is really, this is the exact moment when this form of a well-made play is creaking and it's breaking up, because on one hand it's so refined, then on the other hand Holocaust just happened, on the other hand they cannot even discuss what the play is about because those guys are sleeping with each other and you cannot mention this. So you know, it's creaking in its seams, and you can hear the creaking in this film, because you can have those two guys, you know, after they kill, you know, David, and you know they're panting, and you know it's like, what did you feel?
It's great.
It's so funny because but you see that this form is about to change, and of course Samuel Beckett will dismantle it, and Harold Pinter will bring it into its absolute absurdist, you know, fashion.
Sleuth.
So, exactly. Even in like popular theater. So, but here, you know, imagine like what were the rehearsals like for this film? You know, imagine Farley Granger talking to John Dahl, you know, about like standing close to one another. It had to be an extremely sublimely awkward situation. I think you could probably make
and perverse on Hitchcock's part.
And perverse on Hitchcock's part, exactly. So I agree that at the end when James Stewart says, but there's society, Brandon, you know, and they will judge you. Of course, this is the voice of civilization, right? That of course we are on the side of law and order, of humanist values. Of course, we all are. But this is this voice sort of society. But had this been a really perverse experiment in this Wildian irony, the film would have ended just like Kind Hearts ended. With, you know, the guy just finished writing his diary with, you know, admission of guilt of those 8 murderers, and then he's reminded that, oh, I left the memoir. You know, he basically at the end of Kind Hearts and Hornets, the guy is just about to get away with it. He leaves the prison. He's exonerated. He's innocent, and he said, "Oh, but I wrote the memoir." the memoir, and then we see the memoir in his cell, and we know, yes, the society will come after him, but this is not part of the spectacle, right? It's outside of the frame. And here, of course, it's very much inside of the frame. James Stewart all of a sudden becomes the voice of society, and we will bring justice, to you, Brandon and Philip. So yeah, it's old fashioned in this way, I guess,
Yes, but also the debate of Hitchcock's homophobia. I have the feeling that knowing that actually so many homosexuals contributed to this film makes it pretty unique,
Apparently,
right?
Lawrence,
Probably
Fairly
Granger. I've
Dahl.
even read Dahl as well, right? So
I think so.
it's kind of it's a great contribution on their parts, and in this sense, it's really there's nothing like that in 1940s American cinema or even European cinema of the 1940s. Right? It's really amazing how much. I don't know if sensuality is a good word, but you mentioned the panting, the closeness. It really works on you, and because of the claustrophobia of the film, and this intense, also their acting styles, right? They are they are a bit over the top when it comes to Dahl. Fairly Granger is of course neurotic and so on. It's really something unique. I don't know if it was ever repeated in a similar mix of coded sexual innuendos and kind of in your face, kind of also visual elements, like some people observe, like John Dahl takes the gloves out of Fairly Granger's hands, which is like taking off a condom, and so you can have all this kind of. And also the image of the strangled man. It's also this image of some kind of release. Of course it's death, but death is almost the same as orgasm, right? So
although
it's
I don't buy
know.
the condom argument, because I don't think that in gay culture pre-AIDS condoms were very much in use.
That's a good point.
But yes, I did read this. However, this movie is impossible to recreate in a way, because it's simply, you cannot recreate this level of artful repression.
Exactly.
This is centuries of very specific thinking about homosexuality that was completely disconnected from this sort of democratic aspiration. Let's become part and parcel of society. It's not about equality. It's exactly what Camille Paglia was describing when she was writing about Oscar Wilde. It was this sort of rarefied, rare, like academic, like in Platonic terms, unity of a group that here is defined by their aesthetic taste. Basically they're apart from society, because their difference, their sexual difference brings them apart from the society. But it's not like Brandon and I don't think that Brandon and Philip would be, arguing for marriage equality. They are simply outside of those norms, and this is a completely antiquated
and above them in a way.
Above them, of course, and it's impossible to sort of put this idea against current notions, of equality. It's all wonderful, but it's simply not of this world. So the funny thing is that for me, the women in the film are probably more like they represent the real world in a way. Like when Joanne Chandler comes in, she's more savvy about what's happening, about how Brandon manipulates people, for example. I love the moment, by the way, the most heterosexual moment in the film is when Joanne Chandler and the guy who plays Kenneth, another waspy name. Oh, hello, Kenneth. Hello, Joanne. When they are left finally alone, and they are very awkward because they used to be together. Now she's with David. They don't know yet that David, is out of the picture. And they have this little awkward moment, and he says, "Okay, so how should we proceed now?" And it's a very sweet moment because you can see that these are two very intelligent heterosexual people, very classy, who know how to navigate those strange
don't
waters.
Play the kind of games that our protagonists are playing.
They don't play the game, and especially Brandon played by John Dahl, he's purely he says, "I'm a creature of whim." He says it and this is the best description, because he is a creature of whim, he is a creature of wit, he is a creature of symmetry, and he is a creature of the sort of aesthetic order above anything else. And even when he plays him, like, this villainous smile, he is both charming and sleazy at the same time. He makes me think a little bit of Billy Zane in Titanic.
Oh my
and
God,
he looks
yeah.
exactly the same. He has the same smile. And next to him, Farley Granger, who will reappear in Hitchcock's work. He's such a hot mess because he's like really destroyed. He's shaking, and I'm not surprised because you meeting Brandon, you would be
so
shaken,
we can also speculate about their relationship, right?
Yeah.
Also how in a nutshell how their bed looks like. What are they doing in the bed?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
and I have one joke which I prepared especially for you because I know that you like Steven Soderbergh's Behind the Candelabra.
Yeah, although I just saw the latest one by Steven Soderbergh and it's awful. Magic Mike, The Last Dance. It's
but you like Behind the Candelabra, which is about Liberace, who had Polish roots, right?
Yes.
And here, of course, Rope is also a bit about what's happening behind the candelabra because we had two candelabras.
Of course.
So.
But the thing about the bedroom, there's a long. I mean, we really recommend the book, right?
Oh yeah.
There's this issue because in one part they say that there's one bedroom, which implies that they're sleeping together, and there's another piece of dialogue which says, "Oh, it's in the first bedroom." So maybe there are two bedrooms, right? And maybe they are sleeping apart. So are they together? Are they not together? And in the book, which we will put this on our Facebook, there was a novelization of Rope, apparently, that came out in 1948. And there was the part of the book on the back cover was the little map of the apartment that the film takes place in. And in this map, there's only one bedroom. So maybe everybody knew that really they were just sleeping in this one bedroom, but bedroom is number 6, and it's pretty nice, spacious New York bedroom. I mean, who wouldn't like to live in a pub
nowadays? Nowadays
this?
It would be an apartment for 5 hardworking people,
Or those two guys would be like in IT,
Yeah,
it would be like Zuckerberg and someone else.
Yeah. So great fun discussing this
absolutely
movie.
No, but we were not finished. One more thing needs to be mentioned: music. Music.
The Poulencs.
Yeah, did you? I had no idea that it was like a pre-existing piece.
Yeah,
right?
I've maybe heard like the title is precisely the title of the book by Neil Badminton, Perpetual Movement.
Perpetual Movement, yeah.
So like this, and this is the main argument of Professor Badminton, that this movie, as the Poulencs piece, this movie also pulls us into different directions.
Yeah.
Because in this piece, for piano, and apparently Farley Granger had piano lessons, one hand of a pianist does one thing, gives the rhythm and the bass, let's say, and the other hand does something else. So also there is this when tension and the movie which also pulls you, and I think we kind of touched upon it, right? That on one hand, Professor Badminton writes, we have closure, kind of Hollywood clarity after all, because it is a mainstream film. But on the other hand, and what is interesting is the focus on off-screen space and sounds that Badminton discusses, right? There's this undecidedness, so one bedroom or two, or are they or aren't they, right? This openness and ambiguity, which also invites repeated screenings. So that's a movie, I think, Rope, I have only this kind of feeling with Rear Window, that I can just rewatch it, let's say every year, right?
In one apartment.
Exactly. I like to enter these apartments. I just feel comfortable.
Which one do you prefer? Like if you that's
apartment?
Strange. Yeah, like which one would you pick to live?
No, apartment in Europe is amazing.
Yeah? Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean the Rear Window apartment is like cluttered, and you can really feel that it's a bachelor's apartment, right? And like this kind of, I don't know, this like one square room. It's really a square room, and I think we never enter the kitchen, right?
We only see a sliver of the kitchen.
We see only how Lisa
when Lisa is preparing
the dinner. But basically, I mean, of course, it's a great set, but no, I think I was surprised how magnificent. I didn't remember how magnificent
The view.
And the apartment itself.
the-
I mean,
yeah.
now when I'm 30 and I'm looking to kind of buy my own, or kind of stuff like that, oh my god, that's an amazing apartment. So yeah, I would prefer that one, and also because it seems to be perfect for watching movies. Of course, they don't even have a TV set.
They
in
don't
48.
know because it's 48. Yeah.
They could have,
Yeah,
right?
but they have a piano.
They have a piano,
yeah.
but these curtains, right? You can just close these curtains and you have a perfect cinematic
Screening
mode.
experience.
Rear Window, not really, right? Because he has this very thin.
Right. It's more like a studio apartment, I guess.
Yeah,
in Europe,
yeah.
Or like a bachelor pad. I love this phrase,
that's a great
bachelor pad. But I will just say that if you like this apartment so much, then Professor Bagmington mentions that the same set for the apartment reappears in a musical with Doris Day and Rock Hudson called "My Dream Is Yours,"
Talking about
which could be
coded
another
meanings.
Exactly, which could be another title for Rope. But I just want to read just a tiny piece of this book about this musical piece because it's very interesting. I never thought about it. It's a very distinct piece when you listen to it. So Professor Baddington writes the first section of Francis Poulenc, Trois Mouvements Perpétuels. This three-part composition was originally written for the piano in 1918 and performed for the first time by Ricardo Viñas in February 1919. And then a popular phonograph recording was released in 1928, and by the time that Hitchcock's Rope appeared two decades later, Poulenc's name was well known in the United States, where his choral works were more frequently performed than in his native country. And Hitchcock had to pay $1,500 to use this music, so it was important to him. And since this is modern music, so again, I think this is this theme of modern art, that all those little pictures that we see on the wall, they are not like 19th century, they are not like Portrait of Rebecca. Okay,
Is there any other music besides the opening credits? Because that's also a very modernist touch. That
the only thing is
we
the
only
melody,
have, let's say, diegetic music and sounds like sounds of the streets, right? So another modernist
That's true.
element.
And one last thing, there is an in-joke. First of all, Hitchcock appears, well, there are two different versions of where he appears.
Yeah.
One is
on the street
at the beginning,
during the opening credits.
when we see from above.
Yeah, the other is neon profile, I think.
Neon profile outside of the window. And so that's another, where did he appear? Or here, So, and also there's an in-joke because Mrs. Constance Collier she saw a Cary Grant movie
with Ingrid Bergman.
And it was something.
And it was great.
Yeah, so
something. Yeah, they don't remember.
So she
titles.
basically saw Notorious. So I guess it's just like an in-joke. Oh, I feel like with this film we could go forever. It's really strange and fascinating.
Yes, that's a really fantastic film. And all our conversation is almost as long as the movie.
Really?
No, I mean just 1 hour 2 minutes.
Wow.
So,
Okay. So we will stop. I'm glad that we talked about this because it's an odd bird. I would say this film, and I didn't read the whole book by Professor Badminton, but I read large sections, and I think it's fantastic. So hopefully you will find the book as well, Perpetual Movement. And this was our discussion of Rope. Next time we will discuss
Under Capricorn,
which I haven't seen in years.
Me too.
So
it's also very strange.
It's a transatlantic production as well, and there are long takes as well. And Bergman is there, so we'll see. It's Under the Something, 1949. I am looking forward to this. So thank you so much. Thank you for listening, and please share, please like us, please rate the podcast on iTunes, and we will come back.
We'll be back
in the next episode of Foreign Correspondence.
Deeper into Hitchcock.